The Human Predicament by David Benatar. One does not need much distance to see that there seems something futile about our endless striving, which are not altogether different from a hamster on its wheel. Much of our lives are filled with recurring mundane activities, the purpose of which is to keep the whole cycle going. Working, shopping, cooking, feeding, abluting, sleeping, laundering, dishwashing, bill paying, and various engagements with ever-expanding bureaucracies. People's coping mechanisms are so strong that the pessimist has a difficult time getting a fair hearing. There is plenty of scope for questioning the significance of even the broader goals of one's life. This personal cycle continues until one dies, but the treadmill is intergenerational because people tend to reproduce, thereby creating new mill treaders. This has continued for generations and will continue until humanity eventually goes the way of all species. Extinction. It seems like a long, repetitive journey to nowhere. A meaningful life is one that transcends one's own limits and significantly impacts others or serves purposes beyond oneself. It is difficult to get somebody to understand something when the meaning of his life depends on his not understanding it. It is a cruel irony that meaning in life can actually be enhanced by events that cause a reduction in other aspects of it, the quality of life. Chronic pain is rampant, but there is no such thing as chronic pleasure. The animal being eaten suffers and loses vastly more than the animal that is eating gains from one meal. Most humans have accommodated to the human condition and thus fail to notice just how bad it is. Although death is a release from innumerable living hells to which humans are vulnerable, it is remarkable how resistant humans typically are to death even when that aversion perpetuates their misery. Consider a scenario in which you do find out about your spouse's unfaithfulness. What is the main complaint against your spouse? Is it A, that your spouse was unfaithful, or B, that your spouse was careless enough for you to find out? The former seems correct, but for the bullet-biting hedonist, what was really bad for you was not the infidelity but rather finding out about it. Infidelity plus better deception would not have been bad for you. Death at the early stages of existence is less bad than it is later. It becomes worse as the psychological properties of a person develop, because these properties create psychological unity with the future self whom death deprives of various goods. Then, as one ages beyond one's prime, the badness of death gradually diminishes, not because of a lack of psychological unity, but rather because death deprives one of less. Old age, it is said, is where everyone wants to get but nobody wants to be. Asexual species, such as amoebas, do not die, instead, they divide. Sexually reproducing species die. Bernard Willems claims that two conditions would need to be met in order for immortality to be good for me. First, it must be I who lives forever. Second, the state in which I survive would have to be one that is attractive to me. He argues that the second condition would not be met in an immortal life because one would inevitably become bored by endless repetition of the same experiences. He recognizes that one way to avoid this problem would be survival by means of infinite series of lives. However, that possibility violates the first conditions, he says. The future selves would have to be sufficiently different from me not to get bored by the experiences that would have come to bore me. However, any future selves that were so different would no longer be I. The usual causes are negligence and indifference in case of those who reproduce without intending to do so, and selfishness or misplaced altruism in the case of those who do aim to create new humans. Every birth is a death in waiting. When one hears of a birth, one must know that it is but a matter of time before that new human dies. Sandwiched between birth and death is a struggle for meaning and a desperate attempt to ward off life's suffering. Each generation creates a new one in order to mitigate its own situation. There are powerful biological drives against fully recognizing the awfulness of the human predicament, that explain why so many people succeed in putting it out of their minds, for much of the time. This is mixed blessing. Ignorance is an existential analgesic, but those who do not sufficiently feel the weight of the human predicament, are also vectors for its transmission to new generations.